Sand moved like water across the flats and piled against a shape that did not rise with the gusts. A gray back lay half-buried, one ear crusted and still, dust lifting in thin veils over slow ribs. He saw her from the track and knew the difference between a bush and a body at once. He turned the vehicle leeward, shut it off, and steadied the door so it wouldn't slam. The wind scoured his cheeks as he crossed the open ground with his scarf pulled tight, boots sinking to the ankle. Up close the trunk showed, cracked where the tip had dried and gone still under a drift. He crouched and brushed sand away with the back of his hand. A faint breath warmed his knuckles. He counted it. One, then another, after a pause. She had no bleeding he could see, only scrapes along the knee and a shallow cut on the hip where Thorn had dragged. Exhaustion had made its own wound. He did not shout. He spoke as if sound itself might cost her strength. "Easy, girl." The words went barely a meter before the gale tore them away, but the meaning lived in his pace and his hands, in the way he never leaned on skin. The eyelid nearest him was pasted with grains. He dampened a strip of cloth and dabbed until the lid loosened and blinked once. Her ear felt cool where the gusts reached it, warmer at the fold where his palm sheltered it. He scooped a shallow trench around her trunk so each breath would not drag more grit inside. The wind made a low note in the rings of his keys. He watched her side lift and settle, an imperfect bellow steady enough to tell him what mattered most. If she did not move, he would make the world move a little less around her. There was no tree, no rock outcrop, not even a branch to angle against the gusts. The land was an open throat carrying weather from one horizon to the other. He thought through what lay back in the vehicle. A rolled tarp, a coil of rope, 2 water jugs, a tire iron for a stake, a kit with saline and gauze. Shade can be made. Wind can be taught to spill away. He took the path back with the storm behind him, and returned slower with the tarp and rope and 1 jug held to his side. He pressed the jug into the lee of her shoulder until it held. He unrolled the tarp, fed one edge beneath the dune along her spine, and laid stones along the hem. He used the wind as a builder, letting the fabric bow and shed force upward, carving a low pocket around her face. The first attempt failed. A sharp gust caught the unpinned corner and made a sail that slapped his shoulder and tried to fly. He dropped, pinned the sheet with his chest, and felt sand grind through his shirt. He reset the knot, added a second line lower than the first, and weighted it with a flattened rock. When the next blast came, the tarp bowed and returned, drawing a calmer space where breath gathered without grit. He kept one hand on the rope while he poured a ribbon of water onto the cloth and traced it along the cracked tip of her trunk. She twitched. Not a jerk, just a small insistence of life against the sand. He waited through 3 breaths and tried again. The smell under the tarp shifted. Less dust, more warm hide, damp fabric. The faint iron of stone rubbed raw. Her breathing measured time. It came in uneven pairs, one shallow, one deeper, then a pause, then another set. He aligned his work to that rhythm, moving when the exhale eased. He cleared the trench again, widening it by a finger, and scraped a narrow runnel so the cloth's rinse water would carry sand away. From somewhere under the weather, he felt a tremor through his palm on her cheek, a note more than a sound. It vibrated in bone. He knew that register. It could reach farther than sight, a statement of presence and place. He did not make hope from it. He made a plan. Others might hear if they were within range. If not, the plan stayed the same. Keep the shelter sure, keep her airway clean, spend water like a tool, not a drink. A longer lull opened like a door that might slam without warning. He used it to circle once and read the sand. On the far side, the wind had planed the drift smooth, but near the foreleg he found the story of struggle. The double oval of a foot planted hard and dragged, the crushed rib of a grass stem, the blurred wedge where a knee had slipped. This was not a sudden fall. It was a slow sinking, one failed rise layered over another. He brushed the marks clean to see how they overlapped, gauging leverage, then returned to her face when the gust built again. He touched the loose skin of her ear and held it until warmth bled into his hand. He spoke once more, scarcely more than breath. "I'm here." It was not a promise of rescue. It was a decision to remain where the storm had tried to make the world empty. Sand found everything. It salted his tongue and anchored itself in his eyelashes. It worked under his nails and into the band of his watch. He rinsed the cloth with a stingy pour and did it anyway because comfort prevents sudden, costly movement. He held the tarp's edge when the rope thrummed and eased his grip when the gust passed so the fibers would not saw through. He moved the stone higher by a hand's width and retied the lower line closer in. He let the wind do some of the work, asked it to climb the fabric and leap away instead of kneeling on her face. Time collapsed into tasks. Check the trench, test the knot, wet the cloth, rest the hands only when the line held on its own. The rumble came again, faint and timed with her exhale, and the pocket of calm seemed to notice, holding the sound a heartbeat longer. When the light changed, it was not an end to anything, only a slight lifting at the edge of the storm, a reminder that day moved somewhere outside. He looked once toward the vehicle where the second jug waited and set his steps. Walk in a straight line she could see, carry water and spare rope, widen the shelter by a hand, clear the trench, listen. Fatigue arrived without theater. A soft burn in the wrists and a drag at the shoulders, and he placed it where it belonged, below the task. The flats stayed loud. The tarp bowed and returned. The elephant's breath wrote its narrow script against his skin. Between gusts, the air thinned enough to let through a smaller sound, like a hum from another room. He did not search the blank horizon. He listened for rhythm, not rescue, and worked within what weather allowed only. He stayed beside the gray shape that had not moved and chose again to remain while the storm tightened its hold. The rope came out in stiff loops, its fibers already heavy with dust from the flatbed. He pulled it clear, shook what he could, and fed the first line through the corner of the tarp. The cloth cracked once in the wind like a sail ready to go. He steadied it, worked a knot tight against itself, then bent low to lay stones where the fabric met the ground. The sand was coarse, not fine enough to bury weight quickly, but each gust moved it in sheets, testing the edge before he pressed it firm with his boot. The elephant lay unmoving, her ribs lifting unevenly, her flank marked where grains scoured the skin raw. He checked her eye once, closed now but soft, and returned to the line before the wind claimed it. He chose the angle with care, setting the tarp not as a wall but as a slope that let the air spill upward rather than fight it head-on. He pulled the rope over a half-buried tire rim, tied it to the axle frame of his vehicle, then walked it back in low steps, crouched against the gale. Each knot he made was slow and double-backed, nothing hasty that might fail when the storm peaked again. The fabric bowed and rattled, then stilled into a lean-to that threw a calmer pocket across her face and chest. In that shade, the sound shifted, less of a howl, more of a steady rush. He lifted his scarf, spat grit, and pulled a strip of cloth from his pack, soaking it from the jug he had carried. Water beaded before the wind stole it, and he bent quickly, laying the dampness along the cracked tip of her trunk. At first there was nothing. He pressed gently, turned the cloth, let it cool the skin. Then, after 3 breaths, the trunk twitched once, like a hand testing air, and a faint exhale lifted past his wrist. He let it rest, waited, then spoke with the tone he used when calming skittish cattle years ago. "Easy now." The words were almost lost, but she blinked once, a slow draw of lid against grains, as if answering with effort alone. He placed the cloth back in the jug, rinsed the sand away, and repeated. Each motion was quiet, built from patience, not urgency. The tarp strained against its knots and the stones shifted with small thuds. He adjusted them, pressing 2 deeper, wedging another with his boot sole until it bit. When he returned to her side, he saw her ear shift faintly, enough to flick a few grains. It was not a full gesture, only a tired correction, but it meant she was not gone into herself. He brushed sand from the crease of her flank, tracing where skin folded and rose, where warmth gathered despite the cold bite of the storm. He set his palm there a moment, not pushing, only sharing steadiness. He measured his work in tasks. Each knot held, task done. Each stone seated, task done. Each rinse of cloth laid on her trunk, task done. The tally steadied him the way her breathing steadied the space. The wind clawed at his back but found less purchase now, spilling upward over the tarp's slope. He tested the corner seams again, pulling once with his weight, satisfied when the fabric held without tearing. He took the second jug and poured a trickle along the cloth, watching as the water traced cracks in the dust before soaking into skin. Her chest lifted deeper, almost a sigh, and he let himself believe the work was giving her a fraction of what she needed. Sand stung at his cheeks, and he turned his head only when necessary, conserving the shield of his scarf. His eyes burned, but he did not rub them. Instead, he watched hers. They opened briefly, clouded, then closed again with a slow patience that belonged to something enduring more than any man could. Each blink was costly for her, but each blink was proof. He shifted to shade her face more, his body between wind and skin, and listened for the rhythm of breath. When the tarp rattled loud enough to sound like thunder, he pressed his hand to the rope and whispered, "Hold." He meant it for both of them. The rope thrummed, then eased as the gust passed. The elephant's trunk twitched again, this time curling slightly toward the cloth before resting back. He waited, not rushing to answer, then refreshed the strip with water and laid it down once more. Patience, he knew, made room for survival where strength could not. Time blurred under the storm. He did not count hours but shifts of light in the dust, from bright sting to dim rust, from white glare to ochre haze. Each change told him day moved, even if the sky could not be seen. He kept the trench at her face clear, scooping sand away with cupped hands, shaping a channel that carried grit downwind. He moved in slow arcs so as not to startle, though she had not the strength to startle now. His own shoulders ached, knees raw from kneeling, but he arranged pain as another task, not more important than the line or the cloth. When he rested a moment, he leaned back on his heels and let the storm sound around him. Beneath it, he caught the faintest vibration through the ground, a low tremor, not quite sound, more sensed than heard. It matched the rise of her chest, a rumble folded into her breath. He felt it in his palm pressed to the earth, a message sent into the flat expanse. He did not answer it with words. He answered with steadiness, with rope that did not slip, with water given drop by drop, with cloth rinsed and placed again. Her breath came slower toward evening, but no shallower. The lines of her ribs softened beneath. Sand brushed away. He saw her eye open a fraction longer than before, a tiny improvement, and he counted it as enough. Around them the tarp held. The rope stayed. The stones kept their grip. He touched her cheek one last time before shifting to check his knots. The wind had not relented, but it had been taught to pass by, to spare her face. And in that pocket of calm, they remained together. One man, one elephant, and a wall of cloth between them and the storm. Wind pushed across the tarp in long, steady breaths, and under it the ground spoke in a smaller voice. He felt it through his palm and knees first, a tremor nested in the storm, a pulse that didn't match the gusts. It traveled across sand and stone with old patience, a low music that belonged to her. He leaned closer until grit pressed his cheek and listened without moving anything else. The rumble came again, thin as a thread but certain, carried farther by ground than air. He did not rise or scan the horizon. Sight had been taken. Hearing was the truer measure now, and duty stayed near. He climbed the thin slope of breath beside the elephant's mouth and cleared the trench again so each exhale met clean air. The cloth he had used lay heavy with grit. He rinsed it with a mild pour, squeezed it once, then pressed its cool along the cracked tip of her trunk. "Easy," he said, nothing more. The rumble returned during the quiet between gusts, deeper now, her chest shaping it around bruised breath. He listened for the answer and felt it half a minute later, faint and almost imagined. He let it be what it was without making more of it. Hope took the form of tasks he could name. Keep the shelter holding, keep the airway clear, offer water like medicine. Wait. He set the second jug by the base of the tarp to weigh it, then cut a notch so runoff would not pool where her jaw met the drift. When the fabric bellied inward, he cupped the panel with his forearm, easing the strain, then reshaped the lower stones so the tarp would remember the slope he wanted. He did not let his mind run toward distance. Here, small choices made a circle around breath and kept it safe. Her trunk shifted, found the damp cloth, and settled again. He traced the nostril's edge to lift a crusted ring of sand and let it fall. He tested the temperature at the fold of her ear and felt it return a degree warmer than before. Numbers would have been useful, but today the flats were a scale of touch and sound. The answering rumble came closer, steadier, a low lane through weather. He counted the interval. It had shortened. She moved her lips slightly, the smallest tuck against grit, and her breath deepened once before thinning again into work. He made the shelter do more of the work for her. He eased the top line lower, then braced the corner with the jack handle wrapped in rope so it wouldn't saw the fabric raw. Time at the tarp arranged itself in loops. Check, adjust, rinse, wait, listen. He found room in the pattern, to flex cramped fingers. Sand had worked into the seam of his glove at the thumb, so he stripped it off, shook it, and put it back on. When a lull opened, he wetted a gauze square with saline and touched it to the edge of her eye, blinking with her, clearing the grain that kept scratching the lid. She did not flinch, only breathed, and he matched her pace so she would never have to match his. The storm kept its argument with the land, but the ground's conversation grew clearer. He began to feel, rather than hear, when the answering call was due. It approached like a breath taken on the far side of a door, then came through as if the air had remembered how to move. He held the rope and counted under it to keep himself from naming the future. 3 slow rises of her chest met the interval where the reply might fall, and on the 4th it came, still far but nearer than before. He kept the cloth wet as sparingly as he could. The water did more for her than for him now. He let the trickle trace the anatomy of need: nostril edge, cracked crease, broad skin at the trunk tip where sensation stayed keen. When he lifted the cloth, she followed a finger's width, not seeking, just staying with the cool. He set it down and left it. He used a flat shard to pull back a ridge that had formed against her jaw so no wall of sand would grow where breath wanted room. The distance between call and answer shortened to the span of a long inhale. He did not look up. The tarp would tell him when a larger shape changed the wind. Until then, the world was a circle of breath, fabric, rope, and sand. The elephant sent one more rumble, lower, placed carefully in the ground like a seed. He felt it pass under his knee and carry toward the ridge. He considered the vehicle, not for leaving, but for what it still held. The spare tarp could double the shelter if gusts rose. The jack-handle could pin a corner if stones failed. He weighed the risk of stepping away against proof of approach in the earth and chose to stay. Leaving would turn the call into a missed word. Staying let it grow into a sentence of very old talk. He pulled his scarf tighter, leaned his shoulder into the windward pole, and waited without being idle. The elephant's breath steadied. Not stronger, not faster, but regular in a way that could be trusted. He marked it by a quiet counting that never reached 10 before he started again. The tarp lifted and returned, the rhythm slowing the noise to something a mind could bear. He watched a ribbon of disturbed sand creep along the lee side and vanish into the gully, proof the channel worked. Such proofs mattered. They gave the hands work while the heart learned to wait. When the answering tremor came again, it carried a faint complexity, a second layer like harmony. He softened his shoulders so his hands wouldn't translate tension into the rope. If there were 2 out there, or one with a companion standing back, the path home for sound had already been laid. He rechecked the oldest knots and laid a new stone where a seam had begun to flap. He lifted the cloth, rinsed it, and set it down with the same patience as before. "Still with me," he said, and the sentence broke apart in the wind. The eye opened longer and focused not on him but on the space in front of her. He moved a palm's width away so he could watch without filling that space. She kept her gaze fixed the way animals look toward what they know is coming long before it appears. Late light made the dust inside the shelter turn amber. It wasn't sunset yet. It was the hint of it bending through weather. He used the brightness to check for any swell that might mean hidden bleeding, and found none. He felt along the fold where hind leg met belly, searching for heat or hardness that would warn of trouble. The flesh was soft and cool, worn by sand but not angry beneath it. He returned to her head when the wind pushed hard again and tucked the tarp's edge lower to smooth the flow. The next time the ground spoke, it did so with a calm he could trust. The answering note had moved inside the near flats, no longer at the ridge, and it carried the texture of bodies on the air, the way a line of forms takes the force out of wind simply by standing in it. The tarp's rattle shifted pitch, a subtle sign the flow outside had changed shape. He waited for the elephant to answer before he let himself believe it, and when she did, the rumble left her softly. A stone set into earth. He bowed his head, not in thanks or prayer, but in the practice of keeping small where large things are working. He checked the rope, touched her ear, refreshed the cloth, and held the shelter steady. Hope stayed a task with edges he could grip, and the reply beyond the weather kept coming closer. The gust came without warning, sharp and wide, not a whistle but a shove. The tarp bowed with it, pulled taut as a drum, then snapped upward. 2 cornerstones lifted, rolled once, then skittered off downwind. The edge of the sheet slapped the man's shoulder and caught his wrist in its pull. He grabbed the rope just before it slipped from the axle frame, planting one boot against the tire and leaning back with all he had. Dust surged in around them, lifting in sheets, curling beneath the tarp's hem like smoke forced under a door. The elephant stirred. Not suddenly, just a slow, full-body shift, like something waking not from sleep but from the weight of holding still too long. Her flank pressed into the drift and rolled outward. Her foreleg bent slightly, planted, then reset. With deliberate care, she moved her shoulder against the wind's direction, shifting her mass toward the place where the tarp threatened to fail. The man froze for a breath. He kept his grip on the rope, eyes on the fabric as it flailed, and then, without alarm, without any call, her body blocked the wind. She angled herself just enough to brace the rising edge, leaning forward, into the current. Her ribcage curved into the gale's path, and in doing so, she created a sudden hush in the small space between them. The fabric no longer whipped. It bowed and settled, folding back into shape. Beneath her, the wind lost its reach. Sand fell back to the ground in grains rather than waves. She remained there, steady, her flank acting as wall, her chest as brace. The man let go of the axle, lowered to one knee, and tied the line back with fingers gritty and slow. He didn't speak until the knot was firm again. "I'm here." The words were simple, offered without ceremony, almost to the rope itself, but her ear flicked once, and that was enough. He checked the channel near her trunk and found that the earlier drift had half filled it again. He scooped it clean with both hands, pushing the sand into a bank that might hold a little longer. She didn't move when his shoulder brushed her leg, just shifted her foot a few inches to grant space, as if the effort now was no longer about survival, but sharing what endurance remained. The tarp still shook, but not like before. Her presence turned its edge from a target into a curtain. Wind struck her body but could not get past it. Her eye, mostly closed, held a thin sliver of visible white, and her trunk twitched once, curling back toward the cloth she'd learned to trust. He refreshed it again, carefully tipping water along its edge, then wiping the nozzle clean before laying it down once more. The small rituals continued. He did them not to fix anything, but to honor what still worked. The gusts no longer felt like siege. They came, and they were answered. Her shift had changed more than just wind. It had changed the shape of the moment. Before, he had been the one holding, adjusting, securing. Now she had joined the work. She had taken up a position, said nothing but made the shelter hold better than rope or stone could manage. As the storm's voice rose again, he noticed how her ribs moved, not with panic, but rhythm. A cycle had returned to her chest, not deep yet, not strong, but consistent. He timed his knot checks to it, moving when she exhaled, stilling during each intake. The rhythm helped. It gave him something to follow other than the scream of weather. Another gust hit. The tarp leaned but did not lift. Her shoulder bore the brunt, skin taut and pebbled with dust. He reached up, adjusted a flap near her neck that had begun to fray, then smoothed the seam where fabric met hide. He did it quickly, gently, and she stayed where she was. That was all that mattered. She stayed. His hands shook a little from exertion now. Not fear, not cold, just the accumulation of careful work in difficult air. He flexed his fingers, then dug deeper for a new anchor point, driving the flattened base of a rusted bracket into the soil. He tied the tarp's lower edge to it and reinforced the knots with what rope he had left. Light had shifted again, dimming to that dull, yellow-gray that precedes dusk in the flats when storm clouds choke out any real sunset. The temperature dipped slightly, not enough to be called cold, but enough to steal the warmth from sweat. He wrapped his scarf tighter and checked her breathing again. It was still there. It was still hers. She adjusted her posture once more, not collapsing, not straining, just correcting. The adjustment pressed the tarp down tighter, flattening the lift at the hem, keeping the air calm around his knees. He sat back on his heels and let himself exhale. She had done more than shield him from the wind. She had taken part in the act of staying. The silence inside the shelter changed. It was still noisy. Wind outside, fabric snapping occasionally, but the quality of the space between them had shifted. It was no longer fragile. It had weight, structure, balance. He wasn't holding it alone. He thought for a moment about the term windbreak. What they had wasn't a break in the wind. It was a decision to face it differently. Shoulder first, calm, immovable. He pressed his hand once to her leg, just above the joint, and left it there as the next gust rolled over both of them and moved on. She didn't stir. She didn't blink. She didn't need to. Her body answered the storm now. He was just the hands that made rope stay, water reach, cloth hold. She was the reason it all still mattered. When the night came, it came not as darkness but as quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a storm beginning to let go. The tarp settled more easily. The gusts spaced out, no longer constant, no longer wild. He stood slowly, walked to the rear of the vehicle, retrieved the last jug and brought it back without haste. The last cloth was rinsed with care and laid down once more. She moved her trunk over it and held it there. Not curled, not drawn in, just resting. The wind had found no way through her, and now neither would fear. By dawn, the storm had lost its teeth. The wind no longer carried weight but whispered now, a steady hiss that swept thin curtains of dust low along the flats. The tarp no longer strained at its lines. It rested in folds against the elephant's side, one corner still braced by her body, one edge buried beneath settled grit. The worst had passed, not quickly, not gently, but the world no longer fought them. He unwrapped the cloth from her trunk for the final time and rinsed it with care. The water line in the last jug had gone shallow, but that no longer stirred panic. She had breathed through the worst of it. Her chest rose with more ease now, not deep, but smooth. Her ear twitched with intention, flicking grit from the fold. A sound reached him before any sight did. A footstep, soft and dampened by distance. Not his own, not wind, another, then another. He stayed kneeling, breath held, eyes fixed beyond the still form in front of him. Dust moved like water ahead, parting just enough to let shapes emerge through it. First one, then three, then more. Elephants, coming slow, bodies blurred by the haze but gaining detail with every step. They did not trumpet or charge. They walked with the kind of deliberateness only those who already know the answer can afford. No panic, no searching, just arrival. The largest among them stopped first, an older female, her skin folded and ear-notched, a tear along the top edge like a flag worn through wind. She stood quiet, her eyes fixed on the one who lay sheltered in rope and cloth and stone. The man stepped back slowly, not wanting to move too fast. He untied the nearest line, lowered one edge of the tarp, then backed away, hands low. He did not need to direct anything. This moment did not belong to him. The elephant on the ground stirred. A soft huff left her chest, and her trunk shifted toward the sound she had called for in the earth. The matriarch answered with a low breath, not a sound exactly, but a force that moved through the space between them. The man watched as the herd fanned wide, not chaotic, coordinated. Two younger ones moved off to the right, forming a flank. One paused behind the matriarch, then stepped forward to join her. They created a shape not unlike a corridor, not just gathering but positioning. She moved. First her ear lifted, then her trunk curled weakly, then her shoulder rolled as if testing itself. She did not try to rise quickly. Her legs shifted beneath her one at a time, folding inward, weight shifting, hips adjusting, each motion precise and slow. The man didn't speak. He simply watched, hands open, heart steady. Her front legs straightened first, then her hindquarters followed, and with a sway that nearly dropped her again, she found her balance. Dust fell from her flank like snow shaken from a tree. She stood. The herd closed in, but left her space. They met her halfway, not pressing, not surrounding, but waiting with presence. The matriarch extended her trunk. The rescued one met it with her own. They did not linger long in touch. It wasn't needed. What passed between them passed quickly, enough to settle something that had waited far longer than the storm. She took one step, then another. The herd moved with her, slowly at first, pacing her, letting her choose the speed. The man remained still until the last elephant had passed. He did not follow. He turned once to gather the cloth, folding it neatly and tucking it under one arm. He gathered the remaining rope, coiled what had not frayed, and left the stones as they were. There was no need to erase the moment. The wind would do that anyway. He crouched at the place she had first lain, half buried, still nearly gone. The sand already crept back over it, soft and indifferent. He reached down, pressed his hand to the earth, and held it there for a breath. Their prints stretched behind them, but not for long. The wind moved steadily now, no longer angry but purposeful, smoothing the ground in long passes. One by one, the footprints blurred, then vanished, until only faint shadows remained, hollows where memory had pressed its shape, waiting to be taken by time. He stood, dusted his palms against his leg, and walked back toward the truck. The sky had begun to pale. No sun yet, just a soft lifting of the dark. Somewhere behind him, in clearer air, they walked together, not as rescue and rescued, but as herd.